Okay, imagine for a second that your entire world has just been shattered. The most sacred place you know is destroyed, and everything you thought to find you is now in question. That was the reality for the Jewish people in the first century, and it's right into that crisis that the Gospel of Matthew was written. This isn't just a history book, it's a revolutionary answer, a biography of a king who came to turn everything we think about power and about what a kingdom is completely upside down. So let's trace this incredible story. We're going to follow Matthew's deliberate structure, starting with the promise of this king. Then we'll get into his radical message about this upside-down kingdom. We'll see how the world reacted to him, which, spoiler alert, was messy, and it all builds to this shocking climax: his death, his resurrection, and the final mission he left for all his followers. Right from the very first sentence, Matthew is making a huge claim. See, he isn't just starting a new story out of nowhere. He's arguing that Jesus is the fulfillment of Israel's entire story, the person that all their sacred scriptures had been pointing to all along. And how does he do this? Well, right away, he gives Jesus three titles that would have been absolutely explosive for his audience. First, he's the Messiah, the long-awaited king from the royal line of David. Second, he's a new and greater teacher, just like Moses, who is going to deliver God's teaching. And then, the most staggering claim of them all, he is Emmanuel, which is Hebrew for God with us. Now, what's really fascinating is how Matthew kicks off his argument. He starts with a genealogy, a family tree. But this is not your typical royal lineage. In a culture that was obsessed with a pure male bloodline, Matthew intentionally includes four women with, let's say, complicated and even scandalous pasts. Right from page 1, he's showing us this king's family is unconventional. He welcomes the outsider and the forgotten. And this all brilliantly sets up the central claim of this whole introduction. This isn't just another great prophet or a political leader. Matthew is making the incredible claim that in this person, Jesus, God himself has shown up. He has entered our world to be present with his people. And that one idea is going to be the frame for this entire book. So let's see how this all builds into Jesus' core message. He arrives on the scene not with a plan for political revolution, but with an announcement. God's kingdom is here, and it operates by a totally different set of rules than any kingdom this world has ever seen. Jesus calls this the basileia ton aronon, the kingdom of heaven. Now, we need to get the image of clouds and harps out of our heads. For his audience, this wasn't about the afterlife. It was a declaration that God's rescue mission, his alternative way of life, was launching right here, right now, on earth, to confront evil and restore his rule over everything. And the main point here is that this kingdom completely flips the world's value system on its head. I mean, it's a total collision. Where the world says grab power, the kingdom says serve. Where the world chases honor and fame, the kingdom celebrates humility. It challenges everything people thought led to a good life, promoting things like forgiveness over revenge and radical generosity over hoarding wealth. So, as you can probably guess, a message that radical is not going to get a neutral response. You can't just be indifferent to it. It forces a choice. And as Jesus' ministry gets going, it creates this deep division among the people of Israel, sorting them into very different camps. And the way people respond is really telling. You have the people on the fringes of society, the poor, the outcasts, the people considered sinners. They tend to get it, and they embrace him. Then you have his own inner circle, his disciples, who are often just totally confused. They don't quite get what he's up to. But the religious leaders, the powerful and respected ones, they reject him, and that rejection gets more and more hostile. And this raises the central, dramatic question of the entire gospel. It's the one Matthew really wants us to wrestle with. How? How could the very people who dedicated their entire lives to studying God's word, who were desperately waiting for the Messiah, be the exact ones to oppose him when he finally showed up? The answer really boils down to one word: expectations. They were looking for a conquering hero, a Messiah king who would kick out the Romans and confirms that their system, their power, was the right one. But instead, they got a servant, a guy who challenged their hypocrisy, ignored their structures of authority, and spent all his time hanging out with the very people their system pushed away. He just didn't fit their mold. This growing conflict, this clash of expectations, creates the major pivot point in the whole narrative. Because in response to all this rejection and confusion, Jesus starts to reveal the true and, frankly, the deeply shocking nature of who he is as the Messiah. It all comes to a head when his disciple Peter has this breakthrough moment. He blurts it out, "You are the Christos," which is just the Greek word for the Hebrew Mashiach, or Messiah. He nails the title. He gets it right. But as we see in the very next breath, he has absolutely no idea what that title actually means. Because Jesus immediately pulls the rug out from under him, he completely shatters Peter's vision of a warrior king who's going to crush Rome. Instead, he starts talking about how the true Messiah, drawing on prophecies from the book of Isaiah, isn't going to become king by killing his enemies, but by being killed by them. His path to the throne isn't through power and violence, but through service, suffering, and dying for the sins of his people. It's a total mind-bender. And this radical redefinition of kingship leads us straight to the climax of Matthew's entire story. Jesus finally arrives in Jerusalem, and these two kingdoms, his upside-down kingdom of service and the world's kingdom of power, they finally collide, and it leads to his execution on a Roman cross. Now, through this whole section, Matthew keeps using a specific Greek word to hammer his point home, plero. He uses it 16 times. And this word doesn't just mean to check a box on an old prophecy. It means to fill to the brim, to bring the entire story of Israel to its ultimate intended completion. Matthew is screaming at us that these shocking events are not an accident. So here's the key takeaway. Matthew frames the crucifixion not as a tragic failure, but as the surprising fulfillment of everything God had ever promised. This is the ultimate act of the servant king, taking on the consequences of his people's own evil in order to redeem them. It's not plan B, it was the plan all along. But the story has one last stunning twist. The tomb is found empty. People start seeing Jesus alive again. The resurrection is God's ultimate verdict on Jesus. It's his public declaration to the entire world that despite being executed by the powers that be, Jesus is, in fact, the true enthroned king of heaven and earth. And this brings us to the grand finale of the entire book. The risen king, Jesus, gathers his followers on a mountain one last time. And he's not there to wrap things up, but to give them their mission, to continue the story. So now, with all authority in the universe in his hands, Jesus gives his followers their marching orders. They're to go out to all nations and invite everyone to join his kingdom. And how do they do that? By being baptized and by learning to live according to the values of his upside-down world, a world built on service, forgiveness, and love. And he ends with this powerful promise that just brings the entire book full circle. His final words are, "And surely I am with you always." It's a direct echo of his name from the very first chapter, Emmanuel, God with us. The story that began with the promise of God's presence ends with the absolute assurance of that same presence, empowering his people forever. You see, Matthew's gospel doesn't just leave us as spectators of some ancient story to be put on a shelf. It leaves us with a challenge. It presents the kingdom of heaven as a real thing, a present reality, a movement that we're invited to join. And so the final question for us is this. If this upside-down kingdom is here now, what in our lives, in our values, in our world, is it calling us to turn upside down today?